Welcome to this brief recording on casualty and theft losses. First of all, this is a deduction below the line, so it's going to go ultimately on the Schedule A if the casualty and theft loss works out. And so you'll see a line on the Schedule A for this. What I have in front of me here is a sample problem for Harry and Jenny Potter, who lose an uninsured automobile that is worth $3,300. Let's just say it's totaled in an accident. So we'll run through that scenario, and I'll show you how it plays out. But first, let's talk about what a casualty loss is and what a casualty loss isn't. And so, first of all, to be a casualty loss, it must be a loss to property that you own. And it must be a sudden loss that is not self-caused, or is not, rather than saying self-caused, let me say that it's not intentional. So let's start with sudden, first of all. So if you, if you have an accident, a hurricane, a tornado, a fire, volcanic eruption, those are all sudden, outside of your control type events. Slower things that are not casualty losses would be things like rot in a fence, things that just occur naturally and slowly over time. So if you have a fence wiped out by a hurricane, you probably have a casualty loss. If you live in the Northwest on the western side of the Cascades, where we have a tremendous amount of moisture, and your fence gets to become 12 years old and it rots at the base and falls over, you probably do not have a casualty loss. So the first thing we're looking for is that it's sort of this rapid, sudden type of activity. The other thing is it can't be intentionally caused. So if your house accidentally burns down, you probably have a casualty loss. If you started the fire on purpose with the idea of burning your house down, you probably do not have a casualty loss. If you wreck your automobile and it's an accident, then if you do not have insurance or it's not covered, then you may have a casualty loss. But if you drive your car into the reservoir on purpose because you're just tired of it and you want it to go away, then you do not have a casualty loss. So the other thing that can come in here besides accidents or natural events are things that are actually lost. So I don't know, maybe if you're on Highway 97 and you're traveling from the gorge down towards Bend and you stop there where it crosses the Crooked River, it's a really high bridge. You're at the rest area, you walk out onto the bridge to try to take a great picture, and you drop your camera over the side of the bridge, and you literally have time to fill out the 4684 while you're waiting for your camera to strike the bottom of the gorge there, because it's a very deep gorge. You have a loss in that case. If it was not intentional, then you probably have a casualty loss. So you can lose things like wedding rings or expensive items, and you may potentially end up with a casualty loss. Thefts would also be covered here, so if your car was stolen, you could have a casualty loss. So we're looking for these losses that are, sort of outside of the taxpayer's control and happen in a fairly quick or rapid kind of manner, to sort of summarize there. So let's walk through the form here. The first thing we do on line 2 is we put in the cost or the basis of the property here. So I'm assuming that Harry and Jenny bought this used car for $8,500, let's say, 3 years ago or 4 years ago or whatever. If they had some insurance that reimbursed them, or if they had another reimbursement, for example, let's leave it at that for now. So line 3 is if they had a reimbursement. In this case, they weren't carrying full coverage insurance. The accident was their own fault, and so they got no reimbursement towards their towards their car. It is possible that you can actually not have a casualty loss because you have a gain, because the insurance company pays you more than what you have into a particular asset. For example, if you have replacement cost coverage on a home and your basis happens to be lower because you bought it 20 years ago, you may actually receive more than what you have into this particular asset. So line 2, basis, and then insurance reimbursements, and then line 5 is the fair market value before the casualty loss. In this case, their car was estimated to be worth $3,300. And then the fair market value afterwards. Here we're saying 0, but imagine if you could sell it for scrap for $500, then we might have to put whatever the residual value is on line 6, or if we could get something for it, like maybe it wasn't, who knows, it depends on the type of asset that you have the casualty on. You could have some value after the casualty, like for a home, because the land may still be worth something, or maybe not all of the buildings or all of the structures were damaged, and so there may be still some value there. So we do a subtraction there on line 7 to get to 3,300. We enter the smaller, and so we're just kind of scrolling down here with the 3,300. Then what we do is we take away $100 on line 11. This is designed to try to eliminate all minor casualties. So, right, we all lose things all the time. Say you have, you have your favorite, pen, and it's like a $40 pen or something because it's a really, it's a nice pen, I guess. And, that's the kind of thing that gets lost, and we don't want to have tax forms being filled out on every small items. And so the $100 is just designed to wipe out these small items. So then that gets us to $3,200. And then what happens is we just sort of work with that $3,200. We scroll down here a little bit, and then we end up on line 17 taking 10% of the taxpayer's adjusted gross income. And you may remember from the Harry and Jenny Potter problem that their adjusted gross income was $98,000. And so we bring over 10% of that, which is $9,800, and then we would get the amount that is in excess of $9,800. Well, $3,200 is less than $9,800, so we get 0. This 10% floor works a lot like the medical expense deduction, where depending upon the year, you may have a 7.5% or a 10% floor, and you're looking to deduct the amount that's in excess. And so the 10% floor, along with the $100 amount, along with the fact that you have to be able to itemize your deductions, limits casualty losses quite significantly for most taxpayers. What you end up with here are deductions for very significant losses. So in the case where you lose your entire home to some kind of a disaster of some sort, or you're the victim of a very large investment fraud and you lose a big chunk of your savings or something. So it is designed for not little losses, but significant losses. The idea being that most all of us are experiencing little losses all the time, and so we're trying to provide a benefit here to a taxpayer who is really in a disadvantaged position because of a significant loss. There is more to this form. Here it is for the same idea for business property, summary of gains and losses on those. Here's thefts for Ponzi schemes, and then some things that come into play with disaster areas. Sometimes with disaster areas, Congress will step in and change the tax rules and either eliminate the $100 or the $500, or more likely they would eliminate the 10% amount. So for an area that's a disaster area in a hurricane, for example, they may have a $500 small amount to wipe out the little things, but then they may eliminate the 10% of AGI because they recognize that a lot of people have suffered significant damage, and They just tweak with the rules a little bit in those circumstances. And every time they tweak with the rules, sometimes they tweak them a little bit differently, so you have to just kind of brush up on them. So that is a very quick overview of casualty and theft losses. I think the key things to remember here is that you deduct the lesser of your basis, or the fair market value after reimbursements, minus $100 and subject to a 10% of AGI floor. And the definition of a casualty loss is something that is not intentionally self-caused and is fairly rapid in occurrence. Thank you for joining us again, and we'll catch you in the next video. Take care.